Hey everybody, and welcome back to another lecture with Coding with Roby. In this lecture, we're going to be creating our delete request method to be able to delete to-dos. How we're going to be doing this is by creating a delete request method that takes in a path parameter of to-do ID, and we're just going to delete the record where the ID matches the to-do ID. So let's dive in. Right under our put request method, let's create a new request method of app.delete with the parameter of a to-do ID wrapped in brackets. And now the function name is going to be delete to-do. So we can do this by saying async def delete to-do. And as the parameters, we're going to say to-do ID of type int. And we just need a DB session, which is going to be dependent on getDB. Now, the first thing we need to do is validate that the ID exists. So I'm going to say to-do model equals db.query. And as the first parameter, I'm going to say models.todo dot filter models.todo.id equals to-do ID. And then dot first to return the first record. And now I'm going to say if to-do model is none, then raise an HTTP exception. If an exception is not thrown because to-do is not none, then we want to create a query that filters by the IDs and then finally deletes. So db.query models.todos dot filter models.todos.id equals to-do.id dot delete. And now lastly, we want to say db.commit. And lastly, I'm going to return this command of a status 200 back and with a transaction of successful. Now, the first thing you may be thinking is, why don't we create this into a function just like we did with the HTTP exception? Well, that's a great idea. So let's go ahead and do that. So right under this, right before the HTTP exception, I'm going to create a new function called successful response that takes in a status code, which is a int. And I'm going to return this right here. However, instead of a 201, I'm going to pass in the status code. And now we can just call successful response to each method above. Then I think everything else we're actually returning a model of to do. All right, let's make sure our server is running. And now, after I save, let's open up our Swagger docs. Let's refresh the screen. And now we have a delete functionality. If we say try it out and execute, we can see that our cut the lawn with an ID of 2 is true. So that means the to-do is complete. So let's delete it. So we need to pass in 2 to the delete API. We click down here, and as the path parameter, we pass in a 2. And we say execute. We're going to get a null response body. All right, so the null response body is most likely coming because we didn't return our status response. But if we scroll back to the top and we execute this, we can see that our ID was deleted. The error shows up because of in our code where we call successful response, we need to say return back to this function. So right before this, let's type in return. Let's resave the application, and let's go back to our browser, refresh, let's say read all, execute. We can see that we have a 1, 3, and 4. I'm actually just going to go ahead and create a new to-do. So try it out. I'm going to make the priority 1, and I'm going to leave everything else exactly how it is. Execute, and we just created a new to-do. Go back up here and execute to get all of them. And ID 5 is our new to-do, which is string and is complete. So let's go back down here and let's pass in 5 as our to-do ID. And click execute. And voila, we have a status code of 200 with a transaction of successful. We scroll back up here and execute to get all. We can see that there is no longer a to-do with an ID of 5. However, if we go back down here again and re-execute this delete functionality with an ID of 5, we get a to-do not found HTTP exception raised. And there we have it. We created APIs with a database running that saves all of our to-dos with a get, post, put, and delete the CRUD operations attached to it. But we don't want the application to be done because anybody can delete, create, and get the to-dos. Don't you think it would be a little bit more realistic if we had some type of authorization and authentication attached to the application? Well, let's go ahead and do this in the next section. This wraps up the video on how to create the CRUD operations with a database rendering, and I will see you in the next video.